Okay, so we're going to start off with the past papers. If you remember last week, we started Lamai with the past papers of focus area 16, unit number 5. Now, last week, we only did the MCQs and we finished the class early with the promise that today we are going to finish a lot of things. So today we need to start with the essay questions of this focus area number 16. So we'll quickly do the essay questions. We'll then move into focus area 17. So if we can finish 16 and 17 both fully, today's target is done. That's the plan we have. Cool. One more thing, for joining the mock exam series, Lama, you have to minimum know at least unit number 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8 to do paper 2. If you have not learned the syllabus, Lama, don't join the mock exam. Not learn again. 1 or 2 units not learned is okay. Let's say you have not learned any theory. Without any theory, Lama, mock exam series, they join whenever you can't do papers then. So then you can get my theory class recordings and tunes and cover. Don't join that. So if you can handle most of the questions, then that is fine. Because otherwise it's a waste of your money. I don't want to just for lifestyle to you all to join. Okay. Right. 2011 A levels. Question number 4, part 2. How does the problem of double counting arise in the calculation of GDP and how is it corrected? Explain your answer with an example. It's not a difficult question, but you have things to write. So can you tell me now, what is this double counting error? What is the double counting error? The double counting error is where what happens? Where the same good gets calculated multiple times. It gets included multiple times in the production process. You all remember, because when you start including intermediate inputs, it gets counted multiple times. Now, if you take, for example, wheat flour. Now, wheat flour, or we'll say wheat is inside wheat flour. Wheat flour is inside a biscuit. Biscuit is inside a biscuit pudding. So if you take all of it, you end up counting the same thing multiple times. That is what you call this double counting error. What is the double counting error? When you include intermediate, right? Intermediate goods get counted, Lamai, right? Gets included multiple times in the national income calculation. So how do you avoid this double counting error? How do you do this? Mock exam tips this month, I will do the first 4 mock papers. It's not unit wise. Okay. How is it corrected? There are 2 ways of correcting this. Can you quickly give me answers? How is this one corrected? It's corrected. You have 1 is the final product approach. So you can ignore all the intermediate stages. You can ignore all the intermediate stages and you can only take the final product. Or else you can use the value added approach. You can get the value added at each stage of production. From these 2 also, which one is the better one? Which one's the better one? The final product approach or the value added one? Which one's the better one? The value added approach is the better one. Why not the final product? Why not the final product? The issue with the final product approach is it is not easy to identify whether a good is a final good or not. Now, if I ask you, Lamai, Mari biscuit, is it a final good or intermediate good? Final good kiyanne a final consumer buys and eats. Mari biscuit. Now, if I go to Cargill's and buy a Mari biscuit and eat, that is a final good. Now, what if a restaurant buys Mari biscuit to make biscuit pudding? Then biscuit pudding might be the final good. Mari biscuit becomes the intermediary good. So that issue is there. So it's difficult to identify whether a certain product, whether it is a what, is a mock, whether it is a final or an intermediate good. Right. Because there are questions on the chat box. I'll come to it at the end, because otherwise I have to keep going back and forth. Especially questions about the mocking. I'll come to it at the end. Okay. Right. Okay. So now you have to explain this answer with an example. So remember, whoever the teacher who taught you would have done this with an example. Now remember, I also would have taught you this with an example. We talked about, for example, the wheat producer. Then we talked about a producer making flour. Then we talked about a producer making biscuit, right? So you can give in nice examples, right? Maybe a rice example, whatever example that you have learned, nicely given Lama. So say this producer's output is this much. This is his intermediate consumption. This is his value addition, right? So Anna, ඒ වගේ පොඩ්ඩක් example එකක් ළමයි you will have to do. Now you all remember we had MCQs like this. Remember there was the MCQ question saying there is this industry A produces this much of output, they sell it to industry B. ඒ වගේ you have to make up your own example and then explain the story. This is not a difficult question, but Ara, you have to පොඩ්ඩක් write and practice. And special ළමයි in your A-level paper, for those who are smart, I will recommend to keep an eye on question number 5. Because sometimes question number 5 can be even easy than question number 1. So those who are really smart targeting the 95, 100 kind of marks, sometimes getting 20 out of 20 from question number 1 might be difficult, but question 5 might be easy. Because if you get some calculations and certain things, you can easily score full marks. So keep an eye on it. I'm not saying that will definitely be easy, but sometimes it can. Okay. Then that one is done. Moving to the next one. 2011 A-levels question number 4, part 4. Explain the usefulness of calculating national income accounting. Now, national income accounting and calculating your GDP and all of it. It's not an easy thing, no? It takes so much of time, so much of effort. You have a separate department of census and statistics. So why do we calculate this? Can you all tell me? What can you write now? What is the usefulness of this? Give me a few points. 1. Okay, definitely you can use it for international comparison, right? So you can then compare your GDP with other GDP. So now you had to put that, expand this and write. Their question verb is explain. So maybe for around 3 lines, explain. So you can say, by calculating the GDP of a country, we can use this to compare what? To compare with the performance with other countries. We can compare it with our peer countries. Let's say, for example, with India, with countries similar to our size, we can compare it. We can see what else. Then to measure economic growth, because without GDP, how to measure economic growth? So only then you know whether economy has grown or not. Have we produced more goods? Is the economy progressing? You can talk about that. Then you can talk about what? Yeah, so marking scheme, they would have given points here because that is those are this ones. Okay. Then you can also, what else can you do? You can look at, you can talk about per capita GDP, right? So to measure per capita GDP, you can then see what is one person's contribution to the GDP, right? How is that working? Then you can talk about to look at the structural changes. Which sector is actually performing? Is it the agriculture sector? Is it the service sector? Is it the industry? As an industry, which one? Right? Now, remember in unit number 11 and 12, I would have shown you Sri Lanka's economic growth is uneven. Not the agriculture industry, all are not growing by the same proportion. So you can see which sectors are growing, which one is not growing. Inside industry also, which are the subsectors that are growing. And you can talk about those. Right? Per capita GDP is your GDP divided by your population. Okay. Then you can talk about to look at the functional income distribution. So who and who is getting the income? Right? Is the income going as compensation of employees, or is the income going for other people? Right? So you can look at the functional income distribution. Then you can also, now when you say compare with between years, I would say that will go under point number 2 itself. You measure economic growth and compare and see last year economic growth kiyada, May year economic growth kiyada. So those are a few points that I have given. I would ideally like the ideal format, because the question is talking about explaining. So each of these points, yes, you can talk about living standard, definitely. Each of these points, around 3 lines. There is no rule saying number of lines, but points then that is this. In your past paper book, they would have just given the points, but I'm talking about the actual A-level answer. So your actual A-level answer can be what? Can be in the form of like a paragraph. So what you can do is 5 marks. So 5 small paragraphs. One paragraph is around 3 to 4 lines, not big paragraphs. So for duck, expand, then right. Then you will get your full 5 marks. That is what. Inflation, I would not say a big point. Quality of life, standard of living, all of that you can put under per capita GDP. That's a measure of that. So through per capita GDP, you can look at your standard of living. So higher per capita GDP here, standard of living is high. Can you give me one country that has very high levels of per capita GDP? An Asian country. They are like one of the highest in the world. Singapore. Singapore has a very high levels of per capita GDP. Their per capita GDP, if I'm not mistaken, is around 140,000 140,000 US dollars. Where are we? How much is Sri Lanka's per capita GDP? Unit number 5, 11 and 12, you all learn how it's roughly around. Not just their population is low, population is also a thing, but they are very developed also. Our per capita GDP is around 4,516 US dollars. This is in 2024. We were lower than that, but now we have come a little there. So we are a low middle income. Okay. So all of that you are able to calculate, you are able to compare because you are calculating something called national income accounting. That's a very easy theory question. Done. Then we move into the next one. 2012 A-levels, question 4, part 1. They're saying, sketch a circular flow of goods, services, and resources through households and firms. Draw money flows also in the same diagram and indicate the direction. Easy, no? Now, should you draw the government and external sector here? Question is saying circular flow for households and firms. So simple economy is enough. You don't have to draw the government external loan. So how does it work? You have the households. You have the firms. So how does it work? Households provide land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship to the firms. In return, what happens? The firms pay rent, wages, interest, and profits. Now, this is what you call the factor market. You provide your factors of production, and in return, you get your payment. And then, how it works? What do people do with the money that they get? They spend, right? You have expenditure on goods and services. Money goes. In return, you receive goods and services. So that's the simple story. You can also add the financial sector. I feel own it now because they're only saying households and firms. No? But if you want, you can talk about how some of the income from households, they go into the financial institutions. Right? Financial institutions in the form of what? Pen stopped writing. Give me a second. My wires are nice. Some of you have given me a picture also. Give me a second. Okay. So then what happens? Give me 1 second. Hold on. This wire is jumbled. Right. So some of the money goes through from the households to whom? To the financial institutions, that is in the form of savings. And then that money again comes back into the circular flow in the form of what? Right. So it comes back into the circular flow in the form of investments. So I think that is more than enough if you can draw and explain. So this is a basic circular flow model. I hope all of you all know this. This is not the first time you're learning. I'm not teaching this for the first time. So basically, households and firms, how households provide their land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. In return, how they receive factor payments. Then they spend that money on goods and services. In return, they receive goods and services. So they're saying, draw money flows in the same diagram. So which one is the money flow and which one is the real flow, Lama? To explain, Lama, you just have to explain. So you say households provide their factors of production, in return they receive, and that's what you will explain. Which one is the monetary flow? So if I'm to put numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, which ones are monetary flows? The receiving of rent, wages, interest, profits, that is a monetary flow, that is money. The expenditure on goods and services, that is money. So both of these are money flows or monetary flows. Then 1 and 4, these are real flows. Real flows. So you have to have that. So draw this one. You don't have to explain too much because they are not saying you to explain, but give a small 1 to 2 line body explanation and then right? That is enough. Then you will get your full marks. Cool. Done. Then the next one. Next one is saying 2012 question 2. Explain why a economy's total output is also its total income. How does that work, Lam? Now, I'll give you a simple example of your mock exam series. Okay. For your mock exam series, right, you're getting an output worth 5,000 rupees. That's why your class fees is 5,000. You're getting an output worth 5,000 rupees. Okay. Where does this 5,000 go? You transfer it to my bank account, right? But where does this 5,000, right? That's the output you're getting. Where does the 5,000 go? In order to provide that mock exam series, I have to use my factors of production, rent, wages, interest, profits. So if I am using any land, right, any natural resource, for that I have to pay rent. So I don't have any natural resource, I don't pay rent. Right. Now I have a big cost in terms of labor. So think handling all of your 400 people. Right, to sort of all of you all, give you access to recordings, add you to the group, and next month when you don't pay to remove you from the group, all of that, there is an admin, right, to sort all those out, recording access, everything. So for that person, I have to pay salaries. Then every week you're doing 2 papers, 8 papers in a month. Who is going to mark that and give? I can't mark 400 papers. Then I have a team behind that. So then I have to pay salaries for them. So then there is a huge labor cost involved, admin salaries, all these people, they are marking salaries. So let's say there is a 1,500 there. So I have to pay for labor. To provide this class of 5,000, I have to pay this. Then also, I am using capital. For capital, I have to pay interest. Now, that is not what we normally talk about in our day-to-day life. But I have to print your tools. Right? So you all would have got the printed papers in a file and all. And a printing cost. Then electricity. Then what? In terms of, let's say, what is going to take as capital? My Wi-Fi, my Zoom charges, my website maintenance. So all of those are capital, right? You have to pay for those. So let's say I have a cost of, let's say, 2,000 rupees there. Printing, couriering, packaging, sorting, all of that. And then for all of that I am doing, I also should earn a profit, no? I also should get a certain amount. If I'm the entrepreneur here, then I'm also earning a certain amount. So then the balance will come to me. So that is how the total output of the country is also essentially equal to the total incomes, the total factor incomes. So what you need to, how you need to explain this is you need to say, they're asking you explain why a economy's total output is also its total income. So if a country is to produce an output, how do you produce the output? The output has to be produced using factors of production. So in order to produce that output, you have to pay rent, wages, interest, profits. So then it all adds up to that. So this 5,000 that you all are paying, I'm just roughly showing you how that gets divided. Natural resources I'm not using, so rent is zero. Labor, yes. Capital, yes. Profit is my balance. So all of that put together is that 5,000. So this is your total income. The total output is also equal to total income. So that's the basic story behind it. So you need to figure out the words to write an answer. So I'm not going to spoon feed you with answer saying when word by word. Understand the concept, write in your own words. Now, I know most of you all know this story. Our writing thing is what sometimes you get a little stuck. Okay. Next one. 2015 A level, similar type of question, but a little bit more advanced than that. They're asking you, what are the three approaches in measuring aggregate economic activity? That is easy. You have the output or product approach, income approach, and the expenditure approach. So you write those. Then they're asking you, why do these three approaches give the same value for aggregate economic activity? How come using the output, income, and expenditure approach, how come do you get the same value? So I have put the answer from the marking scheme. I have put it here so that I don't have to write word by word, but you can explain this with the circular flow of income model as well. So if you remember this circular flow model, okay, why do the three approaches give you the same value? When you provide your land, labor, capital entrepreneurship, you receive rent, wages, interest, profit. So that is your income. So let's say you received income worth 10,000 rupees. That is your income. Then what do you do with that income? That income, Lama, you spend. This is the income approach, right? Receiving your income. Then what do you do? That 10,000 you spend here. That is the expenditure approach. In return for spending that 10,000, now you get goods and services worth 10,000. That is the output approach. So it's the same thing you're looking at in three different angles. One is the person's income. The other one is the person's expenditure. The other one is the goods that they're getting in return for their expenditure. So it's kind of the same thing. You're looking at it in three different lenses. That is why all three approaches give you the same value for GDP. So even if you look at it in Sri Lanka, practically it's a little hard to get the same value for everything, but they somehow get it. They put that, do some adjustments here and there, and they get it. Lama. If you look at the Department of Census and Statistics website, you see output approach, income approach, expenditure approach. The GDP is exactly the same. So you have to get that thing. So I'll just read the answer for you all to understand, but it's a very simple thing. See, I'm saying output, income, and expenditure approaches are measuring aggregate economic activity of the economy. Measuring aggregate economic activities of the economy reflect three different dimensions. I told you three different angles of the same transaction. Now, say, Villamai, you're paying class fees 5,000. So when you pay class fees 5,000, you can look at this in three different angles. For you, that is expenditure. So you will say, sir, I have an expenditure of 5,000. For me, that is an income, right? Income of 5,000. Then in return for you spending that 5,000, what do? I provide you a good and service worth 5,000. And I do with the class, I give you the tunes, give the recordings, I do that. So that is your output or your product. So I give you this of 5,000. So it's that one transaction. What is the transaction? You have registered for the mock exam series by paying 5,000. So that transaction can be looked in three different angles. One is your angle. You're paying 5,000 expenditure. My angle, I am receiving. For me, income 5,000, income approach. Then in return, I am giving you a service. You're not just paying me 5,000. That is the output. So that's the story. That's why the output, income, and expenditure approach, all of it gives you the same answer. That's what they say. Three dimensions of the same transaction. So I'm not going to word by word. That will take some time. You all can read Lamai. Now, these kind of things, once you all write an answer for this like once or twice, it sticks in your head. Hit a pass saving, you can write. First time, it might be a little hard. So even when you're writing answer now, first time if it's a little hard, look at the tute and write. But then after that, the next time this comes, now your answer writing will improve. Okay? Then 2015, next one. Same thing. Now here they're asking you, in what ways are national income statistics useful? Right? In what ways are they useful? So what should you write? The same thing that you wrote here. Nathan, usefulness of national income accounting. Now here they asked to explain. In the latest question, they're asking in what ways. You don't have to explain that because the question verb is not explained. They're just asking you in what ways is it useful. So even if you write points, that should be more than it. So you the same answer which you wrote in a paragraph format, you can now write in a point format here. So I'll say 2011, same answer you can copy and paste. Sometimes we don't get the output for the expenditure we make at sometimes. that happens, then inventories and all get adjusted level. That's the part there. I guess that's the 2015 A level paper. Now we go to 2016. So what are they asking in the 16 paper? What is value added? How is it calculated? So you all know what is value added. I just put a small explanation for this because I was lazy to write on the screen. So to save some time, I put a small explanation. So what is value added, Lama? Value added is the newly created value at each stage of production. No? If you take, let's say, a biscuit manufacturer, he is getting, let's say, flour, sugar, all of it from outside. That is what you call his intermediate consumption. So let's say he gets flour, sugar, and all of it worth 5,000. And then he puts this flour, sugar, all of it and mixes and he makes biscuit. He gets an output of biscuit. So his biscuit output is, let's say, worth 8,000. So what is his newly created value? He's getting 5,000 worth of inputs, mixing it and making it to a biscuit, packaging and selling it at 8,000. So his newly created value in my example here is that 3,000. So that is what you call value addition. So value addition is the newly created value at each stage of production. Why do you do this, Tamai? To avoid that double counting error. Because if you now, why do you have something like a value added approach or this value addition is to avoid the double counting? Because sometimes in the GDP calculation, if you also include the flour producer, also include the sugar producer, and also include the biscuit producer, means inside the biscuit, flour and sugar is there. You're double counting. That's why this whole value added thing is there. So you can write how is it calculated and write the equation. So your gross value of output minus your intermediate consumption is only your gross value added. Or you can omit the word gross. You can say value of output minus intermediate consumption is what you call value added. No, you don't have to write this much now. I just put a product detailed explanation for your reading. You can take screenshots. You can just jot things down. That is that. Yeah, because I just product expanded on the answer. Cool? Okay. Then the next one. 2017. 17 is asking, what is meant by product source, income source? Okay, but it's a unknown. Okay. Then what is meant by injections and leakages from the circular flow of income? Identify the leakages in the aggregate expenditure in an open economy with government. So what are injections? What are leakages? What are injections, Laman? So injections is any what? Any money that comes into the circular flow apart from households and businesses, not from households and business firms, any money that comes from outside into the circular, that's what we call an injection. That's why here I'm saying injection represents payments received by firms or households are getting, it's coming into the circular flow that do not arise from the spending of the other group. So businesses paying rent, wages, interest, profits to households, that is not an injection. Any money coming from outside, now for example, investment, government spending, exports, so money coming from outside into the circular flow is what you call an injection. So they say injections increase autonomous aggregate expenditure and there will be multiple expansions that we have learned. No? Remember multiply effect. Okay. Then you see, injection is an income receipt that was not caused by household spending. Injections are, you have investment, government spending, and exports. What are, you don't put loans down, you say investments, savings and investments. What are leakages? Leakages are, see, represents payments received by firms or households that are not passed through their spending. Households and firms are getting that money, but it does not get passed on in their spending within the circular flow. For example, when households get money, part of it they save, leakage. When households and businesses both get money, they import, money goes out. When households get money, they pay taxes, so money going out. So whenever you're getting money, but it is not getting passed on, it's going out from the circular flow, that is what you call a leakage. So you have savings, taxes, and imports as leakage. So for 2 marks, Tama, explain what these are. For 2 marks, explain what this is. Now here they're specifically saying identify the leakages. So put that go into a little bit more detail when it comes to leakages. Cool. Right. This is the easy part, so I'm not going into basic theory. If you have missed the basic theory, this is not a theory class. So I'm assuming you have learned this. I'm just helping you write the past paper answer. Okay. Right. Then 2017, question number 4. Why do we consider a business cycle expansion to be different from economic growth? Now, remember in your business cycle, in unit 5, you all learn in this business cycle, there is this up and down business cycle like going up. That is what you call expansion. So they are asking you, how is this expansion in the business cycle different from economic growth? Right? What is the difference between an expansion in the business cycle and economic? 4-mark questions. For 2 marks, explain this. 2 marks, explain this. So what is this expansion? Expansion is the recovery, right, from a trough until the peak. That is what you call expansion, from the bottom of the business cycle until the peak of the business cycle. From you recover to the topmost point is called expansion. So during this expansion, what happens? During this expansion, economic activity increases, output increases, unemployment falls, right? You produce more and more, all of that happens. Then during the expansionary phase, the rate of utilization of existing capacity improves, mainly due to an increase in aggregate demand. So basically what is happening now in an expansion phase, you utilize your unemployed resources more. So whatever machines that were there now are getting used. Whatever people who did not have jobs now are getting jobs. So using your unutilized resources and you're producing. That's what exactly happens in an expansion. But in economic growth, that's more of a long-term thing. Economic growth is where, see, economic growth is a long-term phenomenon and consists of a rightward shift in the PPC. In other words, economic growth is where your potential output increases. Now, in an expansion, your actual output can go up. Your actual output can increase. So you utilize your resources better, your actual output goes up. But economic growth is a more long-term, it's a more permanent kind of a thing. That is where your potential output or your PPC itself now shifts to the right. So how can you have economic growth? 2 ways. One is, if you can, 2 main sources of economic growth. One is increase in the nation's productive resources. And you might have your resources increasing. If your resources increase, your PPC can shift, your potential output can increase. Or it could be a improvement in productivity. That is with technological progress and all of that. So usually capital accumulation, new investments, all of it happens in economic. So basically what you have to do is explain that economic expansion is more like a short-term temporary thing. That is where you go from the trough to the peak. During that, yes, you're utilizing all your resources, you're producing more, all of that is right. But economic growth is a little bit more advanced. Economic growth is where your productive capacity itself increases, your potential output increases. So then you can go into detail there. In aggregate demand also leads to economic growth. Yes, that is practical now. In reality, when you say economic growth, we talk about the potential output. But how do you actually measure economic growth? Not using potential output. No, you look at GDP. That's the confusion there. Can we say the economic growth in expansionary phase? I would say not to write that. Prolonged expansion, economic growth. Prolonged expansion. Not really. You can say that a bit, but mainly talk about the potential output increasing. If the potential output of a country is increasing, that is what you call economic. Okay. That. Then the next one. Yes, actual output increases in expansion. Here we say the potential output increases in a economic growth situation. Then 2018 is asking, Yes, you can say continuous increase in real GDP. Yeah, looks okay. That's fine. Then what are the limitations of GDP as a measure of people's living standards? Can you give me some points? What? No. So you can write point form. You don't have to go and explain too much, but when you say point form, write complete points. Come a 1-2 line, 1-2 word point clear. Never write a complete point. So what can you all say? Why? What are the limitations? What are the issues? Okay, so it does not take into account happiness and leisure. A GDP won't show you how happy and how much of leisure time you have. Right? That's the issue. What else? GDP will also include what? GDP will also include all these monad demerit goods and all. Just because your ganja production and your alcohol and cigarette production is improving, your GDP will improve. Does that mean your standard of living is going up? So you can say GDP, right, will also include, right, the production of demerit goods. So production of demerit goods. Then does GDP might take into account your environment? Yes, military spending, because sometimes you're in a war, right? You're in a war, and the country is spending so much on war and guns and bombs and all. Does that mean your standard of living is improving? No. So then you can say there are many productive services, right? Productive activities not included. So like what? Services of households, many informal activities, they get omitted because no data, no? So you can talk about that. Then you can talk about my GDP not considering the environmental impact. It doesn't take into considering the environmental impact. You can talk about that. Right? Environment impact, the destruction of your natural resources, none of that happens. So different things you can talk about. So ideally, I feel around 4 points should be enough. Maybe if you want to be on the safer side, write one extra point. That could be fine. Government payments include, that is okay, but I would not connect it too much for this question because they are not asking just limitations of GDP. They're saying as a measure of standard of living. So that government interest not included in economic might not be very relevant. Okay, but not 100% relevant, so I will leave that out. Okay, right. So that's that part, 2018. Then we go into the next. Right. So we have 2 more questions, and then we can go to focus area 70. Yes, durable goods you can talk about. Does GDP, now this is an interesting question. Does the GDP, is the gross domestic product an overestimate or an underestimate of all production activities in an economy? What do you think? Is your GDP now, Sri Lanka's GDP, nominal GDP in dollars in 2024, our nominal GDP was around, if I'm not mistaken, 98 billion US dollars. So is this 98 billion, does it reflect all economic activities, or is it an overestimation of it, or is it an underestimation? What do you think? Okay, can you give me points? Why do you think it's an underestimation? Why is it an underestimation? Why is the GDP underestimation? You're saying actual productive activities are more, but GDP is saying only 98 billion, but we have done more here. What can I say? Yes, you can talk about the underground economy, right? There are so many hidden economic activities that are not included, definitely. Then you can talk about my productive economic services, right? Productive economic services, these household services and all, right? Productive household services, they are not included, okay? Right? Then any illegal activities, right? So illegal also will put under this, right? So illegal kind of activities, the informal ones, right? So you can talk about informal separately if you want. So informal activities, sometimes no one will report, so you won't have data. Okay. So all of that could mean there is a what? That it could be leisure, I won't give as a big part, right? It could actually be a underestimate of the actual thing. Net primary income also one. Effect on the environment, okay, but I won't directly connect it. Can you tell me the other way? Can it also be an overestimate? Can your GDP also be an overestimate? Your actual GDP is only 80 billion, but number is saying 98. Why is it overestimate? Maybe Lama, you might have had double counting error, right? So actually you have included certain goods twice. Maybe, right? Maybe there is what? Second-hand transactions. You have gone and include second-hand transactions also. Then it can be an overestimate, right? Underground inform, you can give a separate parts, no problem. It could be overestimate. Inflation, I will not connect too much because inflation anyway connects with the good. No? Anything else? Yeah, it may include financial transactions sometimes. Ideally, you should omit financial transactions, but maybe those things can get in. So since they're asking, is it an underestimate or an overestimate? And to explain your answer, if I'm not mistaken, in the marking scheme, I'll show you the original marking scheme. Even if you write for one of it, you should get your marks limit. Right? So let me confirm that, right? So hold on. Let me have a look at the original 2022 marking scheme. If I'm not mistaken, you can write for both. 2022 A-level answers. Marking scheme is a little bad. I'll share the marking scheme. Hold on. This is the marking scheme I have. It's not the most clear one. Easy. How much is the marks is that question? 4 marks, no? No, you have to write for both. No. 2 marks each for any 2 reasons. Total. How they given? 2 marks each for any 2 reasons. Total. No, I think you have to write for both sides here, right? So just jot a few points down, Laman. How can it be a overestimate? So see, one thing is it doesn't take into account all the damage that you do for the environment. Right? So then ideally those things have to be reduced from the GDP impact. No? But you show a big GDP. And now, for example, China. So it doesn't show that. Then it doesn't take into account all these harmful pollution that happens. Then it doesn't take into account the change in value of assets, the depletion of biodiversity sometimes, the environmental factors. Then it can also include these economic bads and all. And you can also talk about what we talked about, right? You can talk about it includes, it does not include productive activities like, for example, housewives' contributions. It doesn't take into account, let's say, some productive activities because of the informal economy, because no one reports, it gets omitted. So all of that you can say. Then, so that is overestimate. For underestimate, you can say that. So these for overestimation, right? So it could be overestimate because ideally you should reduce these things, right? Environmental pollution, name it has to reduce your GDP, but you don't do that. Then why is it an underestimate? Underestimate because it does not take, see, GDP ignores productive transactions that do not take place in organized markets. So all these informal activities goes off. So see, cleaning, cooking, all of that is omitted. Then GDP ignores the underground economic transactions, right? It sometimes what can happen? You can have here GDP studies fail to fully capture the benefits of technology, right? Voluntary services are not included. These are points they have included, right? The value of leisure is not considered. So see, even the ones that they have wrote in pen here, it's not very clear. They have given marks for those limit. That's why it's additional written there. So the top parts that they have written is not there, but those are second-hand transactions, all of it, which you can include. Natural resources that are not produced. I don't say they are included, right? Natural resources without human intervention, they don't get included. You can say pure finance transactions could be included. Then it can become overestimate. So those are things that you can ideally talk about. This is the actual A level. It's not very clear now. If you have a past paper book, it should be clearer in that. Is GDP common for all economies in the world? What do you mean common? Every economy calculates the same way. Okay, that's the A level paper on scheme. So give some points. I would say always try to debate it both ways. It's better. Okay. No, depreciation is not excellent. Depreciation is there. Informal economic activities have to be there, but no data, no one reports the data, so therefore it gets omitted. That's the problem. So you can say therefore it doesn't get that. It can be a underestimate as a result. Okay. Past paper, this thing and the marking scheme might not always be the same. Like past paper book, they try to better to argue for both sides, because in certain past papers and the marking scheme is the same. Certain things what happens is the past paper book answers are a little too short, because they also try to save their printing cost. No? So the original marking scheme will have more points than the actual past paper book. And also these things that the examiner writes, the markers, when they discuss, they write things on pen and all. Those will not be there in your past paper book. Some additional points when you discuss, because it's not only those, there could be more points also. So those things can be there. Yeah, underestimate, you can write about hidden economic activities. Okay, that is that. Then we have one last question. Easy one, 2024 A level. So this is the latest question in the December paper. Name the leakages in a circular flow of income model for an open economy. Just to name the leakages. Can all of you all give me an answer if you have not fallen asleep? What are the leakages from the circular flow model? You have. Go in order with savings, taxes, and so just naming the three is enough now. It's like a free mark, no? I feel disappointed that question. Imagine you do all the papers and me mock exam series, other series, me okkam karla. You go to A-level paper and A-level paper says name the three leakages. In vain, you also start realizing in vain I stayed up so late and studied. In vain I paid the class fees for so many things and I went. So these kind of things also happen. But I think not all the questions are like this. Okay, that's focus area number 16. Done. Yeah, so 16 is done. With that, I will end this recording here.